don't know what USAID is, it's the U.S. Agency for International Development. So our office's mandate in Washington is to support our 50-plus offices across the developing world and emerging economies. So we have offices throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, and Asia, across Asia as well. So basically everywhere except US, Canada, and Western Europe. And we're often co-located with US embassies across the world, with State Department. In LAC, our largest energy programs are in Colombia and Mexico. And we also have programs in Guatemala, Ecuador, regionally across the Caribbean, with a focus on Dominican Republic and Jamaica. And we have some smaller programs in Central America. So we really focus on collaborating with a variety of stakeholders, I would say especially ministries of energy, utilities, regulators, the private sector, and local communities as well. So, and our mandate is to promote reliable, affordable, secure energy systems around the world. So we have a really, I would say, excellent network of relationships with these key partners around the world. We've been working in the energy sector for a long time, 30-plus years in many cases. And we have a lot of local employees, which I think really helps us to foster those relationships. So we generally do not invest in infrastructure. That's not our role really as an agency. We partner with these stakeholders that I mentioned. We work on developing energy policy, we foster energy planning, to create kind of a welcoming environment for that private investment, and hopefully create lasting institutional change within the countries that we work in as well. And we focus really on fostering commercially viable, clean technologies. I think this is really important. A lot of our partner countries have been hit really hard by COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, inflation, all of this. And a lot of the utilities we work with were, cost and price sensitive before that in terms of having to make difficult cost calculations around grid maintenance and future investment. And I think that's even more true now in the current context. So one area we've invested heavily in is scaling up renewable energy. We've done a lot. We've helped to kind of design and implement renewable energy auctions, which I'm sure a lot of you all are familiar with. So, capturing declining wind and solar prices with transparent competitive procurements. We supported Mexico's auctions, we supported Colombia's auctions. We've also worked in in South Africa, and most recently the Philippines with their kind of first time national renewable energy auctions. And we also want to help make the grid safe for the enormous changes that we know need to happen for us to have a clean energy transition and make that a reality. So that means modernizing the grid with the hardware and software that's needed to integrate large amounts of renewables, manage and control distributed assets like electric vehicles and solar, distributed solar, and then also have the capacity to bring on more energy-intensive technologies for hard-to-abate sectors, including hydrogen. So, one thing we've seen is we see really enormous interest in clean hydrogen from USAID's partner countries, but sometimes it seems like ambition is not in line necessarily with long-term realities when it comes to being competitive in a global market. And so certain countries may want to invest heavily in clean hydrogen, and they lack extensive experience, for example, in utility-scale renewable energy. We saw this. Europe's clean hydrogen targets really generated a lot of interest in capturing sizable export revenues across sub-Saharan Africa. But the reality is that a lot of countries probably won't export to Europe. Europe will definitely need to import some hydrogen, and maybe that'll be the Middle East and North Africa, but we won't know yet for a few years. So first and foremost, we want to encourage our partner countries to address comprehensive energy planning that considers hydrogen among an array of energy alternatives, while focusing on investments that can lay a solid foundation for the future investment of hydrogen. And we need to think about what are the potential end-use solutions, make sure we're not using hydrogen. If there is a more appropriate solution available, So in a lot of countries, this could mean looking at industrial self-sufficiency for domestic needs. Opportunities include replacing fossil-based hydrogen used for the creation of steel, fertilizer, or petroleum with domestic clean hydrogen, and in select locations, developing hydrogen export infrastructure as an anchor for industrial investments. I did want to talk a little bit about our work through USAID Colombia. So we are supporting Colombia through our agreement with the National Renewable Energy Labs, through NREL, with Colombia's clean hydrogen market in terms of technical, legislative, and regulatory support. So Colombia hopes to develop a national hydrogen market for domestic use and international export of clean hydrogen and its derivatives. And they're particularly interested, and I think this has been a topic earlier in the conference, to produce clean ammonia and fertilizer for near-term use in agricultural applications. So this is attractive since the market cost of ammonia has nearly doubled in recent years due to global shortages and supply chain issues. So this really represents a critical food security issue for countries that are importing ammonia, like Colombia. Colombia already has a regulatory framework in place and existing infrastructure for ammonia, which helps to reduce the costs and complexity of transitioning to clean alternatives, and makes locally produced ammonia from clean hydrogen viable. Their export market could also be quite competitive given low costs for renewable electricity and Colombia's prime location for maritime trade. So USAID is also sharing global best practices on hydrogen and analysis to public and private stakeholders in Bogota, including the Ministry of Mines and Energy, the Colombian Hydrogen Association. We're also working in the more rural La Guajira region, where we focus on working with indigenous students, exploring opportunities for community-led hydrogen and green ammonia projects. So lastly, I'll say in countries where interest in hydrogen is high, but the topic is still really new, which is a lot of our countries, we want to help educate and inform key public, private, and local stakeholders about the relevant production considerations, policy and regulatory frameworks, end-use applications, environmental and social implications. I think we're really all still in learning mode about hydrogen, and we're hopeful that this sort of education and informing approach will be useful, and that can help enable countries to make cost-benefit decisions about these investments. So to that end, we're developing educational materials in partnership with NREL that will help stakeholders to assess these implications of hydrogen development. And in all countries, we want to call for responsible investment, and I think my colleague from DOE kind of talked about this earlier, where private companies transparently engage governments as key partners, recognize the need for local communities to economically benefit from hydrogen investment, and are cognizant of the environmental impacts of their work and take measures to mitigate those impacts. So USAID is here and works in a lot of these countries, like as I said, over 50+ offices. It can be a connector to our partners, to potential off-takers, as well as to others in the US government interagency with relevant tools and expertise on hydrogen. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Courtney Downs at State ENR to discuss their perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. As she mentioned, my name is Courtney Downs, and I work in the Office of Energy Transformation at the State Department's Bureau of Energy Resources. And Sarah and my presentations are a little bit of a swerve from some of what we've seen earlier that are much more technical. And I'm sure you're wondering why is a US diplomat here at the Hydrogen America Summit. So hopefully I'll offer a few perspectives on how the State Department is working closely with USAID, as well as our colleagues at the Department of Energy and the Department of Commerce on international hydrogen development. So the bureau that I work in, the Bureau of Energy Resources, or called ENR, we're responsible for developing and implementing international energy policy for the United States to advance our core objectives, which are really threefold: improving global energy access, strengthening the energy security of the United States and our partners and allies, and accelerating the deployment of clean energy technologies and a transition to a net zero future. And so these priorities are mutually reinforcing, and we're working on them all at once in various different locations. Sarah mentioned USAID's in about 50 countries. Of course, the State Department, we have offices and embassies in over 180 different missions and consulates around the world. So we are active across the board on energy policy priorities. And really, we advance these through a combination of policy dialogues, energy initiatives, technical support programs, and commercial engagements, looking to really leverage the full suite of U.S. government tools and resources, as well as the U.S. private sector, who are eager to partner with countries around the world to provide their innovative technologies and solutions, many of which are on display today. My bureau in particular leads over 20 energy policy dialogues with countries around the world, several of which in the Americas. We also participate in 9 multilateral energy initiatives and 8 international initiatives. And so we are working with countries across the board in both bilateral and multilateral fora to really advance our core energy priorities. So in almost every bilateral and multilateral dialogue that the State Department is participating in or leading, hydrogen is, of course, top of the agenda for many countries. In this region, we have active engagements with Brazil, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, as Sarah mentioned, Chile, and a number of others where we're having bilateral policy and commercial discussions on hydrogen development and how we can partner. So we're seeing growing requests for policy, technical, and commercial collaboration, as Sarah mentioned, and we're really seeing a lot of opportunities to matchmake between potential clean hydrogen suppliers and end users. And one example I wanted to highlight is at the end of October, the U.S. Embassy in Berlin and Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action will be hosting a hydrogen conference, which will have a matchmaking component. So the State Department is looking for ways that we can partner to really get U.S. companies into the international fora and engage with their solutions and technologies and expertise. So I previously mentioned that we're really driven by these 3 core objectives: energy security, clean energy and decarbonization, and energy affordability and access. And really, clean hydrogen for us sits at the nexus of all 3 of those topics. So as Sarah mentioned as well, the world is still grappling with the consequences of Russia's war against Ukraine, the fragility and insecurity of supply chains that we've seen in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're overhauling our energy system to ensure sustainability and reliability and affordability while addressing the climate crisis. And so these are a number of issues that we're grappling with all at once. And for many of our international partners and allies, hydrogen has really been identified as a key tool to address many of these challenges. First and foremost, really energy security. So as I mentioned, hydrogen's become a key aspect of many countries' energy security plans. In one sense, to move away from fossil fuels that are supplied by unreliable suppliers, or for historically energy import-dependent countries to emerge as energy exporters. Furthermore, our partners view clean hydrogen as an engine for economic growth and jobs, and that's, of course, something that the United States shares, and as I'm sure has been on display at the conference this week. And so countries and companies are really competing for a share of this opportunity. As Sarah mentioned, though, we do see internationally that sometimes the potential often overshadows the realities on the ground. And this can often translate to an overemphasis on one end use over another, or on exports over opportunities for domestic consumption. And so for ENR, our engagements are really driven to ensure that the global hydrogen market is developed sustainably and underpinned by diversified and resilient clean energy, diversified and resilient supply chains, and delivers the economic, climate, and energy security benefits that we all know hydrogen can help to deliver. As Sarah mentioned, one of the topics that we're really focused on is how to transition the existing hydrogen capacity to clean hydrogen to keep us on the 1.5 degrees path. Secondly, we are really eager to work with governments and industry to identify opportunities to do so from a policy perspective or a programmatic perspective, or from a commercial angle to really accelerate the reduction in the emissions intensity of existing hydrogen production capacity. And so this is really top of mind for many of our international hydrogen engagements, some of which in the Americas region. And we've also started to partner with governments through our technical support programs, very similar to what Sarah mentioned that USAID is doing, to evaluate the role hydrogen can play in decarbonization and net zero strategies, including transitioning existing production, as I mentioned, but also the impact of hydrogen production, whether that is from renewables or from natural gas, on the energy system as a whole, including impacts on grid reliability. That is a topic that is really at the forefront of many of our partners' minds, as well as the required buildup of midstream and distribution infrastructure, whether that is CO2 pipelines and storage infrastructure if you're producing from natural gas, or the required transmission infrastructure if you're going to be producing from renewables. And so I wanted to close briefly to discuss how the State Department plans to leverage the robust investments the United States is making domestically in hydrogen to help benefit the global community. So I'm sure as many of you know, in August, the White House and the Department of Energy launched the Hydrogen Interagency Task Force, or the HIT, which is a collaboration among U.S. federal agencies to further advance our whole-of-government approach to executing the U.S. national hydrogen strategy. You may be surprised to learn that the State Department is a founding member of the Hydrogen Interagency Task Force. And this is really focused on this aspect of global competitiveness and supply chains, and how do we take these innovations that many U.S. companies are building here at home and that DOE is investing in, and bring them to the international market and drive down costs for our partners around the world. And so with the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law really turbocharging those investments here in the US, how can we translate that internationally is top of mind for us at the State Department. And so we're eager to find opportunities to share the lessons learned from our domestic investments and projects with our partners around the world, and to support U.S. businesses who are interested in exporting these innovative technologies across the hydrogen supply chain. And so with that, we are at time, but I just want to thank you for your attention and this opportunity to provide a brief snapshot about how the State Department is working closely with our interagency partners in the U.S. private sector to help advance international hydrogen development. And we may have time for a question or two, but I will leave that to the organizers. So thank you.
Hi, Susan Vogel from North American Hoganess. And what I would like to, I'm curious about how that conversation goes with the international community when we know that the U.S. has the highest use of energy per capita in the world.
Yep. And we're the second largest CO2 emitter as well. So I will say at the State, speaking for from my perspective at the State Department, we're very honest about the progress that the United States has to make. That's why for us at the State Department, we were really pleased to see the investments that are now being made in the United States. It gives us more credibility internationally to say, look at the action that we're taking at home, putting us on track to meet our updated nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement to really drive down our energy consumption, make our economy more energy efficient, reduce our CO2 emissions, as the U.S., while the second largest CO2 emitter now, is historically the largest contributor. So we are very pleased about that aspect, helps us become more credible internationally. But of course, this is a topic, especially when we talk to small island developing states, the ones that are really on the forefront of climate change. There is global pressure and requests that historically large emitters take more action and do more to meet the severe needs that we have in terms of the climate crisis.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and also say that we have these just energy transition partnerships that came out of the last COP, where basically developed countries like the U.S. are part of these international partnerships with other donors to basically provide payments to other developing countries to transition off of fossil fuels. So at least putting the money where we say our priorities are, and saying we'd like to sustainably contribute to these energy priorities that we're pushing. But I think being really honest with our partners and having honest conversations, I mean, at the end of the day, I think economic development and economic growth is sort of the lens sometimes that you can have productive conversations instead of always leading necessarily with decarbonization at zero. So I think blending all of our goals together and finding a way to work with our partners and see what resonates and build a dialogue together is probably the best way, since our country partners are in charge in the countries we work with, right? And we can't necessarily, we can influence and we can advocate, but we have to defer to them also.